We're really delighted today to bring two perspectives from Israel that I think will really get at a question that's on people's mind, which is how does the Middle East look at the start of the Trump era? And we have two Israelis to offer how they would like the new administration to look at the region writ large, and how to also reinvigorate the U.S.-Israel relationship. So it's really a delight for me to really welcome back to this podium two people who've been friends of the Institute in the past. One is Cabinet Minister Tzachi Hanegbi, who's the Minister for Regional Cooperation, and has been a confidant, a close confidant of this Prime Minister Netanyahu. He's had a range of cabinet portfolios. His involvement in Israeli governance and the Likud goes back to really the 1980s, and he's been involved in Israeli politics ever since. Also, another person who's no stranger to Washington certainly is Professor Itamar Rabinovich, known to many of you. Itamar, as many of you will recall, was Israel's ambassador to Washington in the 1990s. He was also the chief negotiator with Syria, a real scholar when it comes to Syria. And he's also been the head of what's Tel Aviv University's Dayan Center. And he's been the president, the provost of Tel Aviv University. He's the chairman of something called the Israel Institute to support the idea of Israel studies in the United States and in different parts of the world. And I just really think here are two people that have thought a lot about Israel's foreign policy. And it's really a delight for me and for the Institute that they've come back and have shared their perspectives with us today. So I want to thank you both very much for coming. And we'll start with Cabinet Minister Tzachi Hanegbi.
It's already afternoon or good noon?
Afternoon.
Good noon and afternoon, David. I'm happy to see Dennis here. Itamar, good friend, and everybody here, thank you for coming. I just came in the middle of the night, being sad that we didn't have snow in Jerusalem like it was promised to us yesterday, so we found white city. I know that it's not as white to paralyze the city, so you're all happy. But it's beautiful to see Washington snowed in. I was invited to this event, and I was happy to accept the invitation. Washington Institute is a very important think tank entity in DC, and I'm always happy to cooperate, to learn, to read, and when it's possible also to be part of such deliberations. Today we will discuss what is really enigmatic for all of us, the nature of the relationship between Israel and the United States in the new administration. So I'll begin by describing a little bit how we felt in the last 8 years. The alliance between Israel and the United States is in momentum for decades. And it doesn't really matter whenever there is a change in the American administration or Israeli parliament or government. The tendency is very identical to whatever before and what happens next. So it's a given that you will have disputes among the sides in every administration. May it be Republican or Democratic, it can be Likud or Labor. There will be issues that Both sides will not look in the same direction. Both sides will have contradicting strategies, interpretation of the reality, and that's goes without saying that that's part of the natural relationship. It happened during Reagan, who was a great supporter of Israel, and you remember 1981, the Israeli action vis-a-vis the nuclear reactor in Iraq, and Reagan was furious, and he suspended the F-15, I think it was, for several months, and he was really angry with us, and we had troubles with Carter and Bush and the Bush father and the son, and of course Clinton. But last 8 years were different in the way that we did not feel that the disputes, the tension, reflects what happens in a family. It doesn't reflect something that it's part of life. You have to find a way to get over it with sensitivity, with recognition that the other side has its own interest, and even if there is this misunderstanding or contradiction, both sides, since they're on the same side of this equation, work together to minimize the damage and to open a new page. And we were sad. We were not only frustrated or upset, because this is natural thing in such relationship, but we were sad that we felt that the administration is not in various issues. It's not everything. It's not even the majority of issues. But in various issues, especially two issues, the settlement issue and the Iran agreement, not at the beginning with the Iran strategy, but the JCPOA, we felt that the animosity that is growing between us and the American administration is beyond what we expected to happen with such a profound alliance. So whatever happened, it's history, and all of you know it. And we are so hopeful for the future, because we believe that even that once we will have disputes with the new administration, and it's going to happen, there's no way we will have a full understanding, a full cooperation in every nuance on every issue in the next 4 years. We do feel that we are not going to have the same problems that we had with President Obama. We feel that he comes from a place that is different in his understanding where we stand, why we are so passionate about various issues, and it's going to be easier. Let's take the Palestinian issue, for example. David here, Dennis here spent, maybe Itamar also spent, I don't know, thousands of hours, tens of thousands of hours thinking, working, negotiating, and they know how complicated things are. What happened with the last administration is that they, very soon after coming to office, in the first term of President Obama and Secretary Clinton, made a declaration denouncing any kind of building in Jerusalem, in the blocks, wherever, and you remember the slogan was not one brick, not even one brick. I don't remember exactly where was it given a public reflection, but it was told in the first meeting between the president and the Israeli Prime Minister in Washington right after the election of President Obama. And I remember the Prime Minister coming back and he was in shock, because not only it was not just, not only he realized that it's really a new sheriff in town and it's not what he was used to with President Bush or Clinton, but it set the ground for this ability of the Palestinian to be less pragmatic than this, I would say, this border. It's not possible for the Palestinian to accept going back to a negotiation table or understanding that they can either discreetly or publicly negotiate with the Israelis when the American administration's firm demand from Israel is to stop any kind of building in the settlements, not even one block. And unfortunately, this is exactly what happened. There was a time of negotiation for 9 months because of many regional issues, but the major problem was that the Palestinians, especially the pragmatic faction headed by Abu Mazen, could not allow themselves to be less tough, less committed than the best friend of Israel, the American administration. And this led for a variety of events, you know them all. Now this president, as far as we can understand from the way he speaks, it's not that he's for settlement or he's going to encourage us to build wherever we want, whenever we want, but he understands that this is not the obstacle, the major obstacle in the Middle East or between Israelis and Palestinians. He understands that when we say that the major issue is the fact that the Palestinians yet do not find within themselves the power, the courage to recognize Israel as the homeland of the Jewish state, this is where the obstacle is. And this is what has to be challenged. And this is what has to be taken care of. And not whether Israel will build here or build there, because whenever we get an agreement, wherever we cross the border, there's no more settlements. Those who will be in Israel will be in Israel. They're not going to be settlers, they'll be part of Israel. Those who are beyond and going to be part of a two-state solution for two people will also not be settlers, because it's not going to be people who probably will be ready to be under Palestinian sovereignty. So you have to tackle the major problem and not just drag on fighting about issues that are irrelevant to the solution. And this is one example why we are hopeful with the new administration, taking into account, of course, that they will have to take their time to learn, to absorb, to shape the policy, and we will be very happy to be part of this process of thinking together and building together the political part of our alliance. But we know that the instincts are correct. Where they stand is where we stand, and if we were sad vis-a-vis what happened in last administration, we are very hopeful and even enthusiastic about working with the new administration about the Palestinian issue. The last issue I'll relate to, because we're going to speak about many, many issues today, is the Iranian issue. This is exactly another place where we do feel that the new administration does not feel that it has to prove that the legacy that is in charge of or is responsible for is something that overshadows every other problem. They don't come with the legacy of this JCPOA, and they understand how problematic this agreement is. They understand Israel when we said that there are pros and cons in each and every agreement, but we felt that the leverage that the West had and the United States had at the time was so strong to achieve a better agreement, one that will not bring Iran within 12, 13 years again to the place where they can become a nuclear state. And we will be working, hopefully, with the new administration about ideas of minimizing the damage of this agreement, of finding solutions to the basic problems of this agreement. I read, Dennis, what you wrote, I think with Jeb Bush, concerning this issue. You had great ideas there, and we will probably find friends in the White House and elsewhere trying to fix whatever is needed to be fixed, because the issue of Iran becoming nuclear was and still is the most problematic strategic danger that Israel faces. So also in this aspect, in this context, we are hopeful to find an administration that can understand our passions, our fears, our ideas, our vision, and will work together with us in a way that will ensure the success of both America and Israel. It will make Israel and America great again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, Itamar.
Thank you, David. Afternoon to you all. It's a pleasure to be back here at the Institute, to see some familiar faces and some new faces. I will present a somewhat different perspective. I'm not speaking for the government, speaking for myself, and in a way for the Israeli expert community that works on the Middle East and on American-Israeli relations. Let me begin by saying that in a way there is no bilateral or pure bilateral American-Israeli relationship. Dennis has been a historian of the American-Israeli relationship, and I'm sure he will bear me support the view that from day one it was always a question of America, Israel, and the Middle East. And for many years Israel struggled with the question, are we supported because of shared values, or are we supported because we are a strategic asset, an ally? And the purpose of many Israeli policymakers and leaders with regard to that relationship has been an effort to bring the two together, to create a situation where the two are not in contradiction but supplement each other, where Israel would be a valuable ally, a strategic asset, as well as the democratic ally sharing the same values as the United States. This culminated, I think, for 16 years during the Clinton and the second Bush administration. For 16 years, from 92 to 2008, these were 16 years of an unprecedented close relationship between Israel and two very different administrations. The issue of the tension between U.S. support for Israel and U.S. support for its allies has been gradually reduced, beginning with the peace process of the 1970s, when Henry Kissinger managed to overcome the State Department at the time and explain that there was no point in pressuring Israel to give up the Sinai and the Golan Heights, the beneficiary of which would be the Soviet Union. He said, we'll pressure Israel to make the deal when the Arabs understand that the address for getting back the Sinai and the Golan Heights is in Washington and not in Moscow. Culminated in the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty of 1979, and again blossomed during the peace process of the 1990s, when the United States orchestrated a peace process. Israel was negotiating with most of the Arab world. The United States was the key to that peace process, and it was all fitted into an architecture of what was called then dual containment. Let the United States help contain the two dangerous regional powers in Iraq and Iran in the east, while we are settling the tensions in the core area of the Middle East by promoting peace between Israel and its immediate neighbors. With George W. Bush, it was different. His administration found a way of dealing with the Israeli Arab issue, the famous Bush letter to Prime Minister Sharon. But we were to some extent brought together by the war on terror, where Israel was on the right side of the war on terror. It was, of course, 9/11 totally transformed the Bush administration, certainly its foreign policy. So, in addition to being able to settle these two poles of the relationship, the values and the strategy, there was always the personal prisma. In the two countries, the president here and the prime minister in Israel are key players. And when they have a good or a close relationship, the whole relationship thrives. It happened, of course, between Clinton and Rabin, famously, but also with Bush, with Sharon, and then with Olmert, and their teams had a very close relationship, almost daily talks between the chief of staff of the prime minister, the national security advisor. This was an unusual time. And it came to an end, as Minister Hanegbi told us, when the Obama administration came to power. But two things happened. It happened both here and in Israel. It was because when America went left, Israel went right. Netanyahu became prime minister in early 2009, and Obama entered the White House on January 20th. And then things began to diverge. From day one, there was no personal chemistry between the two. And there were substantive differences on policy, both with regard to the two specific issues that Minister Hanegbi spoke about, the Palestinian issue and the Iranian issue, but also with the overall view of the region. If you go back to the Cairo speech by President Obama, his vision of the region did not dovetail with the Israeli vision of the region. And then again, he pressured Israel to respond to the Arab Spring, say by taking a far-reaching initiative on the Palestinian issue, and he famously said Israel should be on the right side of history. He used the term more than once. So the Arab Spring was a march to the right side of history, and Israel should join it rather than try to keep the status quo. If you recall President Obama's interview to The Atlantic, his defense of his foreign policy and his regional policy, and you go back to his outlook on what we call the pragmatic Arabs, the Saudis and other Sunni pragmatics. If you go back to the question of his administration's response to the fall of President Mubarak in Egypt, these were all issues on which Israel and Washington found had a very different view of the region. Let me say something about how Israel views the region. And it's been, since the beginning of this century, actually, the region has gone tremendous changes, and telegraphically I want to mention the main changes. One is, of course, a distancing of the United States, the pivoting away from the region. Not complete, but definitely unwillingness to invest, certainly not to invest militarily, as manifested, say, most clearly and disastrously in the case of the Syrian crisis. Secondly, Russia's return as a major actor in the region, and again, most egregiously demonstrated since the end of 2015 in Russia, when Russia became the key actor at Washington's expense and everybody else, or many others' expense, in Syria. Three, the crisis of the Arab world. Several Arab states are now failed states. Key states that are not failed are preoccupied with huge domestic issues, Egypt, Saudi Arabia. The Arab world is in a bad period from its own perspective, while two major powers have joined fully the Middle Eastern system, Turkey and Iran. Iran since 1979, but more fully since 2003, and Turkey primarily since the Erdogan presidency. Now, this is a dramatic development. These are the successor states to the two empires that for many centuries controlled large parts of the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire and different Persian dynasties. For much of the 20th century, they, for different reasons, were not full or participants in the politics of the region. They now are. So here we have, in regional terms, two very large, powerful states, more than 80 million each, strong economies, developed elites, large military forces, participating in the politics of the region and changing it, and need to deal with that change. So Israel obviously asks itself, how do I fit into the region? What would I like to see in the region? Which takes us to the current moment. There is a new American administration, clearly has not given prior thought to the question of what Middle East they would like to see, speaking specifically about issues such as Iran, Islamic terrorism, the Palestinian issue, or the bilateral relationship with Israel, but not offering a view of an architecture for the region. And I think it would be good, useful for both countries that the Prime Minister comes here next month, and as we communicate, to try to come to as much of a common vision of the region as we can in order to help the region and help our own relationship. And here I'd like to offer insights on the way I see how we can think together and possibly work together on some of the major issues. One, Russia. There's been loose talk about a grand bargain, about a total shift in American-Russian relations. Is there going to be a grand bargain? If it's going to take place, obviously it would affect the Middle East, and more specifically the Syrian issue. Does Russia want to make such a deal? Is Syria going to be an important part of it? And if so, what does Washington want to have, and what does Russia have to offer? I guess Washington mostly wants stability and quiet. Russia, at least on paper, would be willing to provide it, but would it be able to do that? It's not alone in support of Bashar al-Assad. There's Iran as an actor. Is Russia willing to abandon its relationship with Iran in Syria? Can it deliver stability and quiet? Or is it going to try to push maintenance of the Assad rule? If peace and quiet means let Bashar al-Assad regain control of 80% of Syria, is that going to be acceptable to others in the region, to the Sunni Arabs? Are they going to accept that? How about Turkey, which is now, in the absence of American leadership, has been drifting in the direction of Russia, but does Turkey really want to have Russia as a permanent, important neighbor south of its border? So that there are more question marks than answers in this, but this is obviously an important question. So Russia, and then intimately connected to the relationship with Russia, the issue of Syria. Clearly, something needs to be done about the current crisis in Syria. It's from a human point of view, unacceptable. It upsets stability in the region. It threatens the stability of Europe. It obviously creates more pressures in the issues of refugees and immigration, and there's a need to settle that. Is there I would say this, a perfect solution is not available. A good solution is not readily available. And if the United States wants to be an effective actor here, it needs to make a decision that would be very welcomed by Israel, to come back as a major player in the politics of the region, to forget about pivoting and make a decision that the United States wants to play a role similar to the one it played in earlier decades in the Middle East. That, I think, would be very welcome to Israel. Then there is the question of fixing the relationship with the traditional Sunni allies, not to speak to them derisively about the way it was done in the Atlantic interview, but to look at the Saudis, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Moroccans as friends and allies of the United States, and to work with them. That, again, something needs to be done. Israel, as we know, now has still under the table, but on the whole, a very good working relationship with many of these states. And of course, if it can become, in a way, a trilateral relationship, the United States, Israel, and the pragmatic states in the region, that is something that I think, again, would be very welcome from an Israeli point of view. Finally, the Palestinian issue. the relationship between, first of all, it's an issue that needs to be addressed first and foremost from our point of view. From our point of view, it is something that Israel needs to deal with, not because Washington is exerting pressure, but because Israel itself needs to deal with the issue. And of course, it affects Israel's relationship with the rest of the world, the issue of legitimacy, our relationship with the Sunni states, and with Washington itself. And I'd like to offer as a premise to say that the final two-state solution, or the final state solution, is not available around the corner right now. In an effort to try to negotiate such a solution tomorrow is likely to fail, and likely perhaps to produce something similar to what happened after the second Camp David conference. But an interim solution is available. It's not acceptable at this point to the Palestinian leadership. Their policy is everything or nothing. And if the Prime Minister of Israel is willing to make the concessions that Israel will have to make for that to happen, and is willing to try to persuade his American interlocutors that this is what the United States should do in the event that he does want to invest in this area, I think we can have a fruitful collaboration in this regard as well. So, a rich agenda, many question marks, many issues to deal with, but I think a fruitful, fertile field to work in. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for really wide-ranging remarks. If we had to start to both of you, I think for Minister Hanegbi, Tzachi, if you had a look at, we hear these rumors, reports of a possible meeting between the President and the Prime Minister in February. What do you think is, you were saying about what went wrong in the last 8 years. Also, there were good things that in security and intel that Israeli officials talk about as well. But if you had to say, what is key for this Prime Minister in establishing in that first meeting, what would you point to? And because you're going to get asked about this, I might as well put it out there. For example, on the issue of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. But what would you see are the key sets of understandings on how the U.S. and Israel will deal with each other going forward? And you pointed yourself to the relationship at the top is crucial. So if you could just say, like, besides the Iran sanctions, the settlements, are there other areas that you would say, here are some of the principles that I would like the U.S. and Israel to establish early on? We won't be able to work through all the issues so fast, but at least certain principles that you would like. And to Itamar, I guess my question is, you touched on the Sunni-Israel under-the-table relationship, which has got to be one of the bright spots in the Middle East right now, because there certainly is no shortage of challenges and the like. And you mentioned the importance. I think you used the word, it would be welcome for the U.S. to play a greater role in the region, and the U.S. should get closer to some of the Sunni states, which for some ears may be a little jarring that Israel is actually advocating closer U.S.-Arab relations. But it shows you how the Middle East has changed, that Israel doesn't see it anymore as a zero-sum game, that the U.S. can be both close to some of these pragmatic states as well as close to Israel. You mentioned even the idea of a trilateral relationship, and I was wondering if you could expand on how Israel would fit into that, whether it's through formal arrangements or informal understandings. Anyway, Tzachi, you go first.
Thank you, David. The meeting is supposed to take place in February. Hopefully it's going to be until February 26th. That's my birthday. And I'm going to be 20th for the third time, 20 years old. The reason I want the Prime Minister not to come here before the 26th is that he's supposed to be in Australia, and it's the first visit of an Israeli Prime Minister in Australia since Israel was established, and it was postponed several times, once because of the war in Gaza in 2014, and then the president was supposed to be there and couldn't make it. So I was just in Australia, and I know how anxious they are to host the Prime Minister, and hopefully he'll get there on time on 21st till the 24th. But whenever it takes place, it is an important meeting. Those two leaders are good friends anyway. They know each other. They met. They spoke. But this is the first time that the Prime Minister comes to the President of the United States, and there are probably so many issues to be discussed. I'm not sure that the Palestinian issue is going to be the first and the most important on the agenda. I'm sure it's not. Hopefully the Palestinians will come to their senses and get back to the negotiation table, and then we will see whether the United States wants or can help us find the way to run our dialogue. But what we have learned from the peace accords that we have with Jordan since 1993 and with Egypt since 1978 is that when the parties sit with each other and put on the table everything that they have, their interests, their frustrations, the vision, their despair, their emotions, history, everything. The way to get an agreement is to find a common denominator between themselves. And we did it with Egypt. United States was very helpful. You remember the Camp David Summit in Maryland. But it was really between Begin and his team to Sadat and his team. And more than a year before, Sadat was courageous enough to come to the Israeli Knesset, speak his mind, and told us all, no more war, no more bloodshed. And it was moving, it was exciting, and it was strong, and it led later on to the success of the peace talks. And it's still working. When we have, with Egypt, we have very, very good relationship based on our common interest to fight terrorism and to ensure the stability of the Middle East. The same goes with Jordan. The King Hussein had relations with Israeli leaders even before the Six-Day War and after the Six-Day War and before the 1973 war and afterwards. And he didn't need any ICC decision or European Parliament or American administration encouraging him to go forward and get to an agreement with Rabin's government, and it's still working also, like with Egypt, working very, very good. So we want to do it with the Palestinians, and it will probably be discussed with the president. The major issues, I think, were touched on here. We need to find the way to make our relationship with the Arab world more powerful, because we share, the Sunni world, we share the same interests, and we are being challenged by the same enemies. Daesh, ISIS, radical Islam, Iran, and they are the enemies of all those countries. It's not the Zionists, it's not the Jewish devil. We are an asset, not an enemy. Of course, it's not easy for them to go public with it, but I think with the work of the United States and the understanding of the need to bring about such a all-inclusive alliance, the new world that is now there will be much more exposed and much more powerful when it's not going to be only under the table, and it has to be above the table. And what we believe is that the strengthening of the relationship between Israel and the Sunni world, not only Egypt and Jordan, but other countries, will make it easier for the pragmatic Palestinians, to be part of this new development and not to be so much afraid that they'll be isolated because they are pragmatic, not to be all the time terrified from what will be the ramifications of such courageous move on their part when the Hamas or Islamic Jihad or Iran or all the enemies of peace will try to isolate them. But then if the Arab world is on their back, giving them support, motivating them, making them understand that it's their utmost interest to put an end to this ongoing bloody conflict, it will be much more feasible to achieve such an agreement. So I'm sure this will be discussed with the new administration. I would discuss also the need for the United States to acknowledge Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Hey, there's no more Syria there. We don't want Daesh or rebels or others to sit on the Golan Heights, threatening the north, putting the legs, as they used to say, in the Kinneret, in the Sea of Galilee. So the United States could not, in the past, accept the annexation of Golan Heights. I think it was back in 1981. But history has changed, the world has changed, and I think the new administration can be dealing with the Syrian, Russian, Iranian, Hezbollah's issue, understanding that giving legitimacy to the annexation of the Golan Heights is a powerful move by the United States. Of course, in the real context or the all-inclusive context of what's going to happen in Syria. And there are so many issues, I'm not going to touch on each and every one of them, but these are major issues that will be discussed. Of course, the most important one, as I mentioned before, is the Iranian issue, but that's probably is not going to be discussed in a public manner. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Let me respond directly to your question, David, and then a brief comment on Minister Hanegbi's statement. I doubt that there can be any formal, open, trilateral relationship. There was, by the way, such a relationship in the late 50s, not with the Arabs, but what was then known as Israel's periphery policy with Turkey, Iran, and Ethiopia, and it included also the United States. There was a formal structure for intelligence sharing and combating what at the time was Soviet policy and Nasserist collaboration with the Soviet Union. I doubt it. I think that for a while we will see more under the table than over the table. But there is a way of helping to transform that relationship and also add the United States, and that's by responding to the issue of the so-called Arab Peace Initiative. Many Israelis, including on the right wing, such as Minister Lieberman, speak enthusiastically about a regional solution to the Palestinian issue. Say that there's no prospect of coming to an agreement with the Palestinian leadership, but the deal should be made in a way with the Arab world and then passed on to the Palestinians. Now, there is something in it in the following way. It is easier for the Israeli public to accept deals with the Arab world than with the Palestinians, because there is an unstated but a real sense in Israel that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a zero-sum conflict. If they gain, we lose, and vice versa. Not so with the Arab states, where interests can be complementary. So concessions made, an agreement made with the Arab states are easier to market in the Israeli political arena. Secondly, the Arabs can offer concessions that would make it easier or would supplement the value of the deal. If you recall, on the way to Cairo, President Obama stopped in Saudi Arabia and wanted to persuade the Saudis to offer overflights to Israel on the way to Asia as part of a deal. He met with a negative response. But if Israel responds to the Arab Peace Initiative and the Arabs come in and the United States comes in, issues like this can be refloated. Now, I said respond and not accept. The Arab Peace Initiative, the original one and the 2007 one, not exactly relevant. It's a very short document. It looks more like a diktat than a plan. And of course, Syria is not a partner at this point. So, but there's not been an Israeli response. Even Prime Minister Olmert, who tried to negotiate both with Syria and the Palestinians, did not respond to the Arab Peace Initiative. So, a response fashioned more or less like, okay, we are willing to respond. Of course, it needs to be changed. It needs to be formulated in more specific terms, and not as a diktat, but Israel is willing to talk, would be a step forward. So if the administration decides that it does want to seek together with Israel a revival of the notion of an interim agreement between Israel and the Palestinians, and the Arabs, pragmatic states are brought as partners into this, it could be a way of elevating this whole relationship. Now, my brief comments on Minister Hanegbi's statement. One, on Iran, I would say this. I would not focus, if I were the Prime Minister of Israel, on trying to persuade the President to undo the deal. Not going to work, but to enforce the deal, because the Iranians are not keeping it scrupulously, to make sure that Iran doesn't go nuclear, and more importantly, to deal with Iran's behavior in the Middle East. These are three issues on which Israel and the United States can come to an agreement and also find broad support for. Now, on the Golan Heights, with respect, I disagree. I think it would be a bad idea for Israel to speak now about annexing parts of the Golan Heights. The Arab world hates the word annexation and doesn't want to see the territorial integrity of any Arab state change. Iraq, Syria, other failed states are there, but it's very important to the Arabs to keep them to keep the territorial integrity of these failed states, because they are afraid that if you move one brick from the wall, the whole wall will collapse. So, you know, at this point, the Israeli settlements in the Golan are there. It's not an issue. I think, not going to be an issue for a long time, because as long as Syria is not put together again, the issue of the Golan is not an issue. Why raise it? Why turn Israel into a problem in what already is a very complex and controversial issue? So I'd let whatever animals that are sleeping sleep. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Dennis Ross. Let's get the microphone there.
I thought both the presentations were very interesting. One comment and then a question for each of you. The comment is, it is true that historically chemistries between presidents and prime ministers have been useful in terms of shaping a relationship, although the truth is frequently that chemistry hasn't been great, even in administrations that ended up doing things fairly well together. The Reagan administration being a good example. The Reagan-Begin chemistry wasn't very good. Even afterwards, it improved a little bit with Shamir, but it was never that great. And yet the Reagan administration ended up establishing strategic cooperation with Israel and drove a relationship that was shaped, in a sense, on values and interests. So I would, with that as backdrop, I would say maybe with the upcoming visit, maybe the most important thing is to be certain that there's a kind of broad understanding of the approach to the region. And here I would say one of the problems I think with Obama wasn't just chemistry, it was also, and I think both of you kind of alluded to this, President Obama was an internationalist, but he was a minimalist, especially as it related to the Middle East. It's not at all clear what President Trump is going to be when it comes to the region. We know that he has an interest in ISIS, but we don't know if he has an interest in having the United States remain involved as a power within the Middle East, and I think that's profoundly in Israel's interest. The United States needs today, given all the uncertainty in the region, the United States needs a strong Israel in the region, but Israel also needs a strong United States. So I would focus heavily strategically in the upcoming meeting, talking about what are the important strategic interests we both have in the United States remaining in the area, precisely because it will affect America's national security interests. So one thing we've learned about in the Middle East over the last 17 years is that the Las Vegas rules don't apply, meaning what takes place in the Middle East never stays in the Middle East. So I would keep that heavily in mind, and I would then pose a question to each of you more specifically. Tzachi, would you think a reaffirmation of the Bush-Sharon letter be something that could be of interest to the Prime Minister when he comes? It would be an achievement, but it would also send an important signal about and an understanding on the U.S. and Israel as it relates to settlement activity, and that letter itself has implications for how Israel might approach the settlement issue. And to Itamar, given the interest that you have raised in the value of the Arab Peace Initiative, and in effect what you're talking about with regard to kind of quiet understandings, possibly three-way understandings, where would the issue of the Jerusalem embassy fit into that kind of conversation?
The issue of?
The Jerusalem embassy.
Before you get into the details, for those of our listeners who aren't as familiar with the Bush letter to Sharon, was written in April 2004. It was at a time that Prime Minister Sharon wanted to withdraw from Gaza, felt he could get no quid pro quo from the Palestinians, so he approaches President Bush, and the letter contains a paragraph that says that in any final deal with the Israelis and Palestinians, it's unlikely that they go back to what's known as the 1949 armistice line, which is almost the same, not identical, but approximately the same as the pre-1967 lines, but rather there would be major population centers, which is sometimes known as settlement blocks. That's where 80% of the settlers live, and about 8% of the land, even 5% of the land, inside what is known today as the security barrier. So this issue of the letter has kind of returned, and there's a lot of speculation that Dennis and I and others, I think, have in Washington that Prime Minister Netanyahu was going to look for a reaffirmation of that letter, especially as U.S.-Israel relations deteriorated a bit at the start of Obama, when that letter was not reaffirmed by the Obama administration. And it gets to the question of settlement blocks being the focus and not building outside the barrier. That part is not in the letter. But that's why there's been a lot of interest whether this issue is suddenly going to reassert itself in Washington at the time of the visit or in the aftermath of the visit.
Okay, thank you. We understand the hint not to go there. Okay. I agree, Dennis, with your assessment about the chemistry is not as such an important component. And I can say that even though, let's say, Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Obama were not the best of friends, during the 8 years of the last administration, the administration helped Israel in so many ways that not all of them are known, not all of them were made public. Intelligence, political backing and support in various international forums. Of course, the new MOU that was signed, ensuring $38 billion to Israel in the next 10 years, beginning from 2018. Military cooperation. And it had nothing to do with the fact that we did have disputes over various issues. So it's a fact that you can fight and you can be furious at each other and you can really, have emotional reactions, but the alliance is alive and kicking and being enhanced and very strong and going all the time. And being encouraged, and it's going to happen, hopefully, with every administration in the future. I disagree with my friend disagreement with me about Syria, but I'm not going to relate to it. We will have we'll be invited again, especially to deal with this issue, hopefully one day, when the Syrian issue will be more relevant. But about Iran, I do have to say something. I'm not calling for, nobody I think is really calling in Israel for tearing the agreement, the JCPOA, apart. But the Iranians has inherited or they have a structured interest to comply with the agreement. Maybe they'll violate it, maybe they won't, but their interest is to make the clock work and get to the end of the agreement, get all the sanctions relieved, get the world invest in them, get their economy richer and richer. And when time comes, and that's where the various paragraphs of the agreement expire, they are free to have unlimited enrichment, uranium enrichment facilities, as much as they want, and they say how many they want. They want 190,000 centrifuges working, and by the agreement, it's a legitimate possibility. And they will have the R&D during the time, so they don't even need so many centrifuges to have the material needed for hundreds of bombs, and to be what they call a breakout state, and to be in a situation where, as President Obama put it in a very sincere way in an interview given at the time of the debate about the agreement, there will be weeks from achieving the capability of reaching the armament. Of course, they will still need to do things that we don't know if they have achieved when it comes to the weapon system. But I think that just waiting for them to violate or being very, very tough about the implementation of the agreement, it's a big mistake, because they will implement it, because it's a great agreement for them. And they have patience. As you said, it's a Persian empire living for thousands and thousands of years, and they can wait 8 more years to get to the point where the world, or the United States leading the world, is allowed them to be relocated. So we cannot just sit back and be paralyzed. We have to do many, many things vis-a-vis the ICBM program, the issue of them breaking the United Nations Security Council resolutions concerning those ICBM programs, and many other issues about terrorism and their influence in the region and others. But these issues are important for Israel and for the United States alike. And they are more important, Itamar, for the Arab world. Much more, because we know how to defend themselves. We did it in '81. According to various American books, we did it also in 2007. But we know who cannot do it. Saudi Arabia cannot do it, maybe Egypt, maybe Jordan, maybe UAE, Qatar, Bahrain. The Arab world is terrified seeing United States disassociating themselves from this issue, or on the contrary, praising it as a great legacy. So it has to be challenged. Again, this is not a public issue yet, but it has to be challenged. And the Israeli leadership understands that as time passes, it becomes more difficult to challenge it. And thank God we have a new administration that understands the importance of this new challenge. Did you ask about the embassy before?
Yeah. I asked before about the Sharon letter, though. If you
Okay, Sharon letter. Okay. It'll be very not diplomatic for me to relate to it, because I'm still, unlike my friend, I'm still representative of the Israeli government, and these are very sensitive times. So I can relate to it, but not in a public forum, unfortunately. Thank you.
Okay. Speaking of sensitive issues like the embassy, it is very sensitive on all fronts. Very much so in the Sunni Arab states. In two of them, the royal houses in Jordan and Morocco have a particular status with regard to the Muslim holy places in Jerusalem. Also, much of what we discussed as the rapprochement between Israel and Sunni Arab states is with the regimes, not necessarily with the public. And the example of selling Israeli gas to Jordan is very telling. I mean, where there were public demonstrations against something that the government or the regime decided to do for Jordan's own best interests. So the issue of transferring the embassy to Jerusalem is likely to, if it's, I would say, pursued without precaution, is likely to generate powerful public reactions in large parts of the Arab world and Muslim world, including these Sunni pragmatic states. But I think we are a bit behind the curve here because the Trump administration itself has realized that what could be said during the campaign or in the first days needs to be adjusted to reality. It is an administration in the midst of a learning and adaptation process, and without knowledge, but just guessing, I think they are probably investing a lot of effort in trying to find a creative approach that would enable the president to live with his commitments without embroiling the region.
Tzachi, if you can relate to it, do you see the statements of the administration in the last week, which seems to kind of put probably go much quieter on this issue? Is this just a temporary pause until the prime minister comes? From your perspective, or do you see it as easing away from its campaign pledge on the issue of the embassy, and which is an issue that stirred a lot of interest here in Washington, as you can imagine?
One creative idea can be, instead of moving the embassy to Jerusalem, it can be moved to Amona, where there are new places now that is evacuated. Are you okay with it?
Well, yeah.
It's a joke.
No, but the people of Amona are worried about parking problems.
I think this decision is long overdue, and every American administration could not stand up to its commitment. And I have an instinct, a feeling that the current administration will make this decision. But I agree, it's going to take its time, and they will have to do it not in a hasty way, but to consider exactly how to make it in a way that it really only a correction of abnormality. Not many people know, I'm sure in this room everybody knows, but I'm not sure that in Israel or in the Arab world people understand that in 1948, one of the few countries in the world that did not recognize Jerusalem as the capital city of Israel was the United States, that did locate its embassy in Tel Aviv in 1948. It has nothing to do with the Israeli-Palestinian 1967 conflict or any other annexation of Jerusalem law in 1980 or whatever. This was something that was very, very problematic at the beginning of our relationship, but we didn't have such an alliance with the United States in 48, so it was probably something that was accepted as something that we have to live with till it changed. But now I think it's a burden on the friendship, on the intimate relationship. It is no justification, and we cannot be bullied by Arab violence threats or other warnings that it will, bring about the fire into the Middle East, because it has nothing to do with the peace process, and it is not going to determine the final status of Jerusalem. It has to do about recognizing the west side of Israel as the capital city of Israel, like it was established in 1948. So, but of course, it's all about emotions and not about rational thinking. And I believe and hope the administration will find a way to stand up to its commitment. And it's a domestic commitment. It's not about Israel. Israel didn't beg for it or ask for it. It's about the legislation that was agreed upon by the American Congress, I think, back in October 1995, and every 6 months is being waived due to the presidential authority or force or power. So it's between the Congress and the administration and every Israeli, left, right, secular, religious, every Israeli prays for this unjust decision to be changed, and hopefully it will happen.
So, Tzachi, just before I go to the next questioner, I just want to be precise because this is being seen on C-SPAN, and not everyone's aware of all these nuances about Jerusalem. So am I hearing you correctly by saying, look, by the U.S. relocating it to the western part of Jerusalem, it's rectifying an anomaly, a historic anomaly, and it is not about recognizing the whole city under Israeli sovereignty because that's for the peace negotiations?
100%.
Okay.
That's for
right.
sure.
Just wanted to be clear. Alan McCoskey.
Thanks. Itamar mentioned the return of Turkey to the Middle East. I wanted to ask Mr. Hanegbi, what do you see as the future of the U.S. Of the Israeli-Turkish normalization process? I wonder if you could make specific reference to their role in Gaza, to security possibilities. There's already been a meeting on the margins of another meeting between, I believe, the Israeli Deputy Chief of Staff and the Turkish Chief of Staff, and also to the energy issue. And how do you balance that with the relations you've developed in recent years with the Hellenic world, Cyprus and Greece?
With whom?
Hellenic.
The Hellenic world, Cyprus and Greece.
We had great, I would say, intimate strategic relationship with Turkey for a long time, even during Erdogan's primaryship. I visited as a minister Turkey several times in various occasions. I had great encounters with my colleagues, and we all know what happened. There was a change in the first in the language and the rhetoric, and later on probably with the sentiments of Erdogan vis-a-vis what happened in Gaza and his Islamic affiliation, and he felt that Hamas are victims, and we know everything. And of course there were also political maneuvers and other issues involved. Israel made a pragmatic decision not to escalate the relationship, not to inflame the ongoing tension after what happened with the Marmara. So the Prime Minister took advantage of the fact that President Obama at the time mediated a phone call between him and Erdogan, and Israel apologized. Israel agreed to sign an agreement accepting the based on humanitarian reasons to compensate the families of altogether, I think, 10 Turkish terrorists that died during this confrontation on Mavi Marmara. The ambassador came back, our ambassador came back, and I think the energy issue there of the gas, the natural gas that we have found, plays an important role in the understanding of Turkey and of Israel, that we have strategic potential cooperation that can be challenged, and we have to put aside issues that belong to the past. Still, we will have to be very cautious, and they will have to be very cautious, because the Hamas did not evaporate, and he has this tendency every 3-4 years he forgets what happened in the last confrontation and provokes us again, and then we have to do whatever we have to do to defend ourselves, and it might again influence the Israeli-Turkish relationship. But it seems that Greece, Cyprus, Turkey, we have relationship with each and every country now based on our mutual ways of having our projects together. Energy with Cyprus, we're thinking together how to cooperate With Greece, we have a lot of cooperation in various aspects. We have very good relations with the new government in Greece, even though it's a left one. They are very much sympathetic to Israel's interests and vice versa. So the balance is there, and we will have to be very wise not to enter ourselves into the local and regional debates that there unfortunately still exist.
Itamar, do you want to say anything on this?
Yeah, just to add to all of this, the issue of Syria. I think Turkey has huge interest in Syria. I think focus maybe too heavily on the Kurdish issue. I think that one of the important byproducts of the Syrian crisis has been to reveal some fundamental weaknesses in the fabric of the Turkish state itself. It had always been assumed that Turkey is one coherent, powerful actor in the Middle East, and it turned out that this is not the case, that the sense of frailty and threat to the foundations of the Turkish state by the prospect of Kurdish sovereignty either in Syria or in Iraq or in both is so powerful that it became a driving force. At some points, as we witnessed, Turkey preferred ISIS over the Kurds in northern Syria. Now it, of course, with the call it Russian-Iranian victory in Aleppo, the pressure on Turkey has eased somewhat. But as we proceed in dealing with as the Syrian crisis continues to unfold, and the prospect of a potential Russian-American deal and so forth come to the horizon, the question of Turkey's input into all of these and what the Turks really want remain big question marks on the agenda.
Okay, Alan Gerson. The mic right over here.
Thank you. I was thinking of two questions that the Trump team might ask any visiting Israeli delegation beyond what we already touched upon. And the first, it seems to me, would be an interest in getting an assessment from Israel as to how it now views Assad. And given the military victories and his consolidation that he's been able to gain with the help of the Iranian forces and the Russian forces. And the second question might relate to a very interesting op-ed piece that Martin Indyk put forward not too long ago, in which he said that contrary to the general logic that Jerusalem being the most difficult issue should be left to the end, we should actually have a Jerusalem first diplomatic initiative, whether it's directly with the Palestinians or between some larger coalition of Arab states. So perhaps you could comment as to what you think an Israeli answer to those questions might be.
The second question, I totally agree with Martin. I think that the refugee issue is much more problematic because I haven't heard any Palestinian leader, prominent leader so far, disassociating themselves from this dream of right of return, of getting back to Acre and Safed and Nazareth and Jaffa. They say that in closed rooms, they do understand that it's a non-starter, but it's not really important what's happening in closed rooms, because at the end, this will have to go to a referendum, both in Israel and among the Palestinians. And if you don't teach the Palestinian people that this is not going to happen, that it's something that no Israeli sane leader, left or right, can accept, and that the Palestinian refugees will have to find their solution and their aspiration implemented in the two-state, two-people solutions, and not in the 1948 areas. So you're going to either be killed or lose in the referendum. So I don't see even a beginning of understanding among the pragmatic Palestinian people that this is a must education issue. On the contrary, what I see, you know what we see, the incitement and all the other stuff. So I believe this is much more problematic than finding a creative solution to the Arab inhabitants of Jerusalem, or a creative idea for the holy basin. And remind me the first question. I have an answer, but I don't remember the question.
Assad.
Assad, yes. Well, we have thank you. We have a 5 years virtual debate in Israel about what is better, Assad, devil we know, or some kind of replacement, a devil we don't know. And it's virtual because there's no need for an Israeli decision about it, or Israeli, policy about it, because it's not up to us to decide, or we are not going to make any real difference or to have an impact. But my personal decision in this debate that I was participating in is that the best scenario is that Assad is out. I think that it's the biggest blow to Iran and Hezbollah in the region, and they think so. This is why they fight for years to make Assad survive. This is why thousands of Hezbollah fighters are spilling their blood. Many of them were killed and wounded and crippled to achieve this goal. This is why Iran, they didn't put boots on the ground, as they say, but they sent thousands of Shiite militias people from other countries, not Iranian, most of them, beside some Iranian commanders. Many of the Iranian commanders were killed already. But they invest in it because they understand the ramifications of Syria not being led by a supporter of the radical front headed by Iran. So I think this is, if it would happen, it would be great news for the world, for the West, for Israel, for the Lebanese, for the real people, or the peaceful, wishful people of Syria, who would love, I think, a leadership representing the people and not a segment or a minority. But again, this is practically virtually, and I'm sure my friend Itamar thinks more about it. Maybe it's interesting to hear what you think.
Itamar, yes. Could you weigh in? You've studied Syria your whole life. What do you?
Sure. Briefly about Martin Indych's idea. You know, part of the problem in trying to negotiate Israeli-Palestinian issue, or the issue of the question, is that we've been at it for a very long time, and almost everything has been tried ad nauseam. So if somebody comes up with an out-of-the-box idea, it's worth thinking about. And I would say, if negotiations are to resume, of course they should be prepared. You don't just send delegations into the room. You know, let's try to find out whether there's merit to it in practice, in trying, if we come to the point of trying to prepare for a negotiation. Now on Israel and Assad, I would say I'm oftentimes a critic of the current Israeli government, but not on Syria. I think it has acted responsibly. It's kept us out of the crisis. It acted at points and at places where action was required, and on the whole has done very well. I think that the debate that has raged, maybe rage is not the right term, but it took place in Israel during the past 5 years between the devil we know and the other school, has now been decided. I think we heard Mr. Hanegbi clearly. The government, I think, correctly understands that Assad staying in power is bad for Israel. I would say for the following: first of all, sometimes we can take also a moral position. I think it is wrong for the international community to support a mass murderer staying in power. I mean, Milosevic as the president of Serbia, it's not acceptable, morally speaking. Second, this would be a victory for the coalition of Russia, Iran, Assad, and Hezbollah, which is bad for Israel, because we know that Hezbollah has already tried to establish itself in southern Syria and to extend the line of confrontation with Israel from the Mediterranean into the Golan Heights, and that's where they would go. More concretely, is that if the current trend continues, And with Russian and Iranian help, Assad continues to crush pockets of opposition and push southward. Eventually, the south of Syria would become an arena of fighting between regime and insurgents, and would possibly embroil both Jordan and Israel. So it's an issue that needs to be thought through. It's one area in which the United States, a moderator Arab state, Jordan, and Israel could very well collaborate.
Okay, Hillel Fratkin back there, and then we'll take a few in a row because we might get close to the last round. So Hillel, right next to Hillel, and Yup, Van Westen.
Okay. Thanks very much for all your remarks. The question I wanted to raise stems from a remark that Ambassador Rabinovich made concerning an interim settlement or solution with the Palestinians. And I have two questions with regard to that. One is, I take it from that suggestion that you agree with Minister Hanegbi that the Obama approach was basically fatal to any reasonable negotiations, but there now exists some possibility of negotiation. And the second is what you see that interim settlement or solution to be.
Okay.
Okay, let's do three in a row here, right next door. And could you identify yourself, please?
Yes, absolutely. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Sylwia Szafłowska. I'm the Polish Assistant Defense Attaché. And my question, I have two questions. First is regards the momentum in the U.S.-Israeli cooperation and possible Palestinian peace talks. Do you think that there is still a role for the European Union, and how the increased cooperation U.S.-Israel will have, what kind of influence will it have on your relations with the European Union? So that's the first question. And the second one, as for Syria, do you think that perhaps part of the talks of your Prime Minister with President Trump would be possible, your say, in Syria in terms of there will be a rapprochement with between U.S. and Russia on Syria and cooperation? Will you have do you think, and is it in your interest to have a part, to have a say on the future solutions in Syria? It, also in terms of pushing back Iran from Syria. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Jaap van Wezel. I have a more general question about the strategic importance of the Middle East. There are different report studies that indicate that oil will run out for the Middle East in the next 30 years. What implications do you think that has for Israel in general, for the importance of the Middle East on the world scene?
Okay. All right, so good. So we're going to allow the our panelists here to respond to these three sets of questions, and we'll conclude. So just to recap, if I have this correctly, Hillel's question is to what extent, if you could articulate what an interim agreement would look like and contrast it to what you think the Obama administration was trying to do. The second question, if I understood from our colleague from Poland, was about to what extent would stronger U.S.-Israel cooperation impact the EU and the Europe's role going forward, and also how Israel's interests regarding a U.S.-Russia rapprochement. And Yup's question is about the role of oil, right? Strategic of oil. Yeah, what is the...
Okay, let me go first. So, you see, the issue is this. People sometimes describe the situation as a tension between the quest for a comprehensive settlement and continuation of the status quo. So my 2 points of departure are these. One is, it's impossible right now to find a comprehensive settlement, and two, there is no status quo. What we call the status quo is actually a drift towards annexation. It's creeping annexationism. And one of the things that Israel can offer in an interim agreement is to stop that process. The revival of the Bush-Sharon letters has been mentioned before. This could be one element of the agreeing on on the blocks and on construction just inside the blocks. Of course, I'm free from coalition considerations in Israel, and I can say that, but...
Yet, maybe you'll join politics.
Yeah. Okay. You see, I come home with at least one offer. So,
He didn't say which party.
yeah. Thirdly, Area C, 60% of the West Bank is Area C. Much could be done and offered to the Palestinians in Area C. The economic reconstruction of Gaza in order to reduce the human pressure cooker and so forth. And I could go, I think there are about 10 elements that do not touch on final status issues, would lead to a significant improvement in life standard of life in the West Bank in Gaza, and could stabilize the situation. But of course, the main obstacle is that the PA's leadership is absolutely dead opposed to the idea of because they say an interim settlement becomes de facto a final settlement, and they have to confront the issue. What do you prefer? Continuing drift to annexationism or the benefits of an interim settlement? Now, the question of declining importance of the Middle East, yes. One of the changes in the region during this century has been the decline in its importance, to a large extent because of the declining importance of Middle Eastern oil and the rise of alternatives. And part of the underlying reasons for the American pivot away from the region has to do precisely with that.
Thank you. About Europe, I'm in charge of some of the context of the relationship between Israel and Europe. I represent Israel in the discussions with the European Union, and I'm going to attend a special meeting dedicated to those relationships in Brussels next month. And I just came back from a meeting in Barcelona with Federica Mogherini, the High Representative in the European Union, and we always emphasize our need and readiness and hope to have very close relations with Europe. Europe is our best trade partner. We have so many connections with so many countries in Europe. And we would like to see the European approach to the Middle East conflict in a more balanced way. The automatic acceptance of the Palestinian approach. Still, many countries in Europe share our views about this conflict, and since in the European Union you need anonymous decisions, it helps us sometimes to minimize the tension with Europe. But we do feel that now, with the new administration, there is also a room for more European involvement, of course, with a more balanced approach. And Europe can play a role because they are much closer to the Palestinians than the United States is. And maybe some kind of a triangle can occur and motivate the Palestinians to go back to the negotiation table. We have many projects with the Europeans in order to encourage projects, civil projects, economical projects in Judea and Samaria, in the West Bank. I represent Israel in the AHLC, the ad hoc liaison committee about the Middle East, the donors committee in New York every September, and I see how much important is the European contribution to the very lives of the Palestinians, both in Gaza and in the West Bank. So, and it's important to bring them on board and to do it with cooperation with Israel and the Palestinian Authority. Now I was appointed to be the Minister of Regional Cooperation, whose mandate is to cooperate with Jordan, with Egypt, with the Palestinians, with other neighboring countries, with the help of Europe and other places in the world, in order to, at least till we have a final arrangement, to allow the Palestinians to build their own institutions, to have a more solid economy, to have infrastructure that will allow them in due time to become a functioning state. About Syria, the last remark, as Itamar put it, we were very cautious about doing anything in Syria. We only made some red lines concerning the fact that we don't want to see smuggling of state-of-the-art weapons from Iran through Syria to the hands of the Hezbollah, because it is going to make them more motivated whenever they will be freed from the mud in Lebanon to again provoke Israel to again be the aggressor. And we don't want this to happen, another round of violence. Another interest of us is, as was mentioned before, to prevent the implement or the Syrian, Iranian, Hezbollah front to use the Syrian Golan Heights in order to attack Israel, infiltrate into Israel, build the infrastructure of terrorism cells in the Golan Heights, taking advantage of the fact that there's now no man's land there. So we did have to take actions several times. We prevented it from happening, we intercepted, and since then we see that this strategy was put aside, and we hope that's going to be the situation in the future. Thank you.
All right, I want to thank our panelists, and I hope you join me in thanking them for a very wide-ranging discussion. And I'm sure as the new administration here takes shape in Washington and the Prime Minister comes and visits, this issue will be very much come to the fore. So I really want to thank you for getting us started here in 2017 on this issue, and more discussions to come. Thank you all very, very much for coming. Thank you.